I need to read the skill file for front-end design first. Actually, this is a writing task, not a front-end task. Let me just write the story directly. They didn't know I owned the firm that designed their house. That's the part that still gets me, even now. My mom called me on a Tuesday evening, not to ask how I was doing, not to check in, just to make sure I understood that I was not welcome at my sister's engagement party. She said it plainly, the way she says most things that hurt, without flinching. Marlowe, I need you to stay home Saturday. This is Sloane's moment and I don't want any tension. I asked her what tension she was referring to. She didn't answer that, she just said, "You know how you get," and hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that. The apartment was quiet. My cat Biscuit walked across the keyboard of my laptop and closed 3 tabs I hadn't finished reading. I didn't even move to reopen them. You know how you get. I've been hearing that my whole life, since I was 11 and I asked my dad why Sloane got the bigger bedroom, since I was 16, and I cried at Thanksgiving because nobody acknowledged I'd gotten a full scholarship to the summer architecture program at Virginia Tech, since I was 22 and I showed up to Christmas with my first real paycheck, and my mom asked if I could spot her $400 for the electric bill before I'd even taken off my coat. That's the thing about being the steady one in a family that runs on chaos. You become a fixture, something load-bearing that nobody looks at. I'm 31 now. I run a small architecture and interior design firm out of Richmond, Virginia. We have 11 employees. We've been featured twice in Architectural Digest, once for a sustainable mixed-use development in Charlottesville, once for a private residence renovation outside of Nashville. We are not a famous firm. We are not trying to be. But we are good and we are busy, and every single project we take on, I pour myself into completely. I didn't come from money. I want to say that clearly because it matters for everything that comes next. My parents grew up working class in Eastern Ohio. My dad drove trucks until his back gave out. My mom worked reception at a dental office for 20 years. When I got into the architecture program at Ohio State, my mom told her coworkers I was studying interior decorating. She wasn't trying to be dismissive. She just genuinely didn't understand what architecture was or what it would become. Sloane is 3 years younger than me. She has my mother's eyes and my father's stubbornness, and a talent for being exactly what people want her to be in any given room. She's charming the way a lit fireplace is charming, warm and beautiful and capable of burning things down if you're not careful. I love her. I have always loved her in that complicated, exhausting way you love someone who has been absorbing your family's full attention since the day she was born. She got engaged in February. His name is Preston Holloway. He works in commercial real estate. Or so I was told. Development, acquisitions, that kind of thing. My mom told me about the engagement over text with 3 heart emojis and a photo of the ring. I texted back, "That's wonderful, congratulations to both of them." My mom did not respond. The party was scheduled for the last Saturday in March, my parents' house in Columbus. About 40 people, I was told secondhand through my aunt. Catered, which surprised me because my parents don't have catering money. I found out later that Sloane's future in-laws were covering it. The Holloways are from outside Cincinnati. Old money, or the kind that's been around long enough to look old. So when my mom called that Tuesday and told me not to come, I want you to understand what she was really saying. She wasn't just saying, "You're not invited." She was saying, "You don't fit the image we're trying to project." She was saying the Holloways will be there and we need everything to look seamless. And you, Marlowe, with your questions and your opinions and your refusal to pretend everything is fine, are a liability. I said okay. I said I understood. I hung up the phone and I went back to work because that is what I do. Here is what my mother did not know. 2 months before Sloane's engagement, I got a call from a project coordinator named Dennis at a development company called Holloway and Fitch. They were redeveloping a historic commercial block in downtown Columbus, converting 3 adjacent buildings into mixed-use space, retail on the ground floor, residential above, preserving the original facades. The budget was substantial. The timeline was aggressive. They had gone through 2 architecture firms already and were looking for someone who could come in, stabilize the design vision, and actually deliver. My firm was not the obvious choice. We're based in Richmond. We're not enormous. but we had done 2 similar adaptive reuse projects in the past 4 years, and apparently someone on their team had seen our Charlottesville work and passed it up the chain. I flew to Columbus in January. I met with their internal team. I walked the buildings. I spent a week putting together a proposal that I am genuinely proud of, something that respected the original 1920s construction while making the space livable and functional for the next 50 years. They accepted it. We signed the contract in early February, right around the time Sloane was getting her ring. Holloway and Fitch. I knew the name. I did not connect it to Preston until later. In my defense, I had never met Preston. He was mentioned in text messages and described in phone calls as Sloane's boyfriend, the real estate guy. My family does not traffic in last names. My mom refers to her own sister's husband as what's his name, and has done so for 15 years. So when the Holloway and Fitch turned out to be Preston's father, the founder and principal of the firm, I genuinely did not know. Not until March. Not until the Saturday I was told to stay home. I wasn't going to go. I want to be honest about that. I had decided, quietly and without drama, that I would not insert myself into a situation where I wasn't wanted. I had learned that particular lesson slowly and at some cost. But I had learned it. I was going to spend Saturday finishing a materials specification document and ordering Thai food and not thinking about the engagement party. But then my aunt called. My aunt is my mother's older sister. She is 70 years old and has survived 2 husbands, a house fire, and a brief period in the 90s that nobody talks about. She is the only person in my family who has ever looked at me and seen me clearly. She called at noon on Saturday while I was eating cereal over the sink. "I'm at your parents' house," she said, "and I need you to know that your mother told everyone you had a prior commitment out of town. A work thing." I put the spoon down. "She told them you sent your love." "She did not," I said. "She did," my aunt said. "Marlowe, I think you should come." I told her I wasn't sure that was a good idea. She said, "I didn't ask if it was a good idea. I said I think you should come." And then she said, very quietly, "Sloane asked where you were." She looked upset. That was the part that moved me. Not spite. Not a desire to prove anything. Sloane asking where I was. That was the part that got me out of my apartment and into my car. Columbus is 2 hours from Richmond if you drive straight through. I made it in 1:50. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I wore what I'd been wearing all morning. Dark jeans, a white shirt, a blazer I'd grabbed off the hook by the door. No grand entrance planned. No speech prepared. I was just going to walk in quietly and find Sloane and say congratulations to her face, the way a sister should be able to do. The party was in the backyard and spilling into the living room. Tent, string lights, white flowers and low arrangements on the tables. It was actually beautiful. More beautiful than I expected, which made something in my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. My mom saw me first. She was standing near the drink table, and her face went through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, then alarm, then a kind of controlled, social situation smile that didn't reach her eyes. She started walking toward me. "Marlowe," she said. "What are you?" "I came to congratulate my sister," I said. That was all. I kept walking. Sloane was near the garden gate with a small group of women I didn't recognize. She was wearing a pale green dress and her hair was down, and she looked genuinely happy, the kind of happy that sits in a person's whole body, not just their face. When she saw me, she went still for half a second, and then she crossed the yard and hugged me hard. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," I said. She held on for a moment longer than expected. When she pulled back, her eyes were a little bright. "Mom said you had a work trip." "I moved some things around," I said. She looked at me for a beat. She knew. She knew in the way sisters know things, even when they don't say them out loud. She squeezed my hand and then turned to introduce me to her friends, and I smiled and shook hands and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I had been there maybe 20 minutes when I heard someone call my name from across the patio. Not Marlowe, not hey, or excuse me, my last name, Calloway? I turned. He was standing near the back door of the house with a drink in his hand and an expression on his face that I can only describe as genuinely confused, the look of a person who is seeing something that does not compute. He was tall, well-dressed, maybe 40. I recognized him from the video call we'd done in January when I presented our Phase 1 design. It was Preston's father, the Holloway and Fitch. His name is Gerald Holloway. He is the reason my firm has its largest contract to date. He is the man who looked at our proposal and said, in a room full of skeptical executives, "This is the one." He flew me out to Columbus on his company's dime. He shook my hand in front of 12 people and said, "I look forward to working with you." He was also apparently about to become my future brother-in-law's father. He crossed the patio. I stood where I was. The small group near me went quiet in the way that happens when someone important-seeming moves with purpose through a room. "What are you doing here?" he said, and then, immediately before I could answer, his expression shifted. He looked at Sloane. He looked back at me. "Wait. Calloway." "Sloane Calloway. You're her sister," I said. "Yes." There was a moment, a real one. The kind where you can feel everyone recalibrating. "You're the architect," he said. "I am." He laughed, not a mocking laugh, a genuinely surprised one. He shook his head. "We've been working together for 2 months, and I had no idea." "Small world," I said. Preston appeared at Gerald's shoulder, drawn by whatever energy shift had just happened on the patio. He was younger than his father, same height, with an easy confidence about him. He looked at his father first, then at me. Gerald said, "Preston, this is Marlowe Calloway. She's the architect running our Columbus project." Preston looked at me, then at Sloane, then back at me. And the realization crossed his face slowly, the way dawn comes. Gradual and then suddenly everywhere. "You're Sloane's sister," he said. "I am. The one who..." He stopped. He glanced at his father and said something very carefully with his eyes that I did not miss. Gerald Holloway turned to my mother, who had materialized at the edge of the group with the particular expression of a woman who is trying very hard to keep something invisible. He said in an entirely pleasant voice that carried across the patio, "Margaret, did you know your daughter is the lead architect on our Columbus project? We signed her firm in February. She's been outstanding." My mother opened her mouth, closed it. "I believe we owe her a great deal," Gerald said. "She came in and completely stabilized a project that was, frankly, close to coming apart." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have heard in a long time. I didn't look at my mother. I looked at my champagne glass. I took a slow sip. I thought about the materials specification document waiting on my desk, and the Thai food I had been planning to order, and the 2 hours of drive still ahead of me tonight. Sloane's hand found my arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said quietly, close to my ear. "It didn't come up," I said. That wasn't entirely true. The real answer is more complicated, and also simpler. I never talk about work in my family because nobody has ever asked. Not once in 11 years of building something real has anyone in my immediate family said, "Tell me about a project you're proud of." My mom asks if I'm busy. My dad asks if I'm making enough. Sloane, to her credit, asks how I'm doing, but she's never asked what I'm actually doing, so I never offered it. You stop offering things that nobody reaches for. Gerald Holloway turned out to be the kind of man who does not let comfortable silences stand when he finds something interesting to talk about. He spent the next 15 minutes telling anyone who would listen, and at that point, everyone was listening, about the Columbus project, the buildings, the design approach, the way our firm had handled a particularly complicated structural issue in the second building without blowing the historic preservation guidelines. He was enthusiastic and specific and kind, and every word he said landed in my mother's living room like a stone dropped into still water. My father found me near the dessert table an hour later. He's a quiet man, my dad. He's always been more comfortable with silence than with words, which is something I inherited and probably the reason we've never quite figured out how to talk to each other. He stood next to me for a moment, looking at the table. Then he said, "I didn't know you were doing something like that." "I've Been doing it for a while, I said. He nodded. He picked up a cookie and ate half of it. Then he said, "You should have told us." I looked at him. "Dad, I have been trying to tell you for 11 years. At every Christmas, every phone call, every time you ask how things are going and then change the subject before I can finish the sentence." I said it quietly, not with anger. That had burned out a long time ago. Just with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a truth for too long. I stopped trying because no one was listening. He didn't say anything to that. But he didn't walk away either. He stood there and he finished the cookie and we looked at the yard together, and it was maybe the most honest 5 minutes we've had in a decade. My mother did not speak to me directly for the rest of the party. She moved around me with the efficiency of someone who has had a lot of practice pretending things aren't happening. She thanked guests, refilled drinks, smiled at the Holloways with the full warmth she keeps in reserve for people she wants something from. She is good at that. She has always been good at that. But I caught her, once, near the kitchen door. She was standing alone for just a moment, and she looked, not ashamed exactly, something more complicated, like a person realizing that the story they've been telling themselves has some significant gaps in it. I thought about walking over. I thought about what I would say. In the end, I just let her stand there, not out of cruelty, out of a kind of recognition that some reckonings need to happen privately, and that me handing her a script was not going to help either of us. Sloane walked me to my car at 7 o'clock. The sun was going down and the air smelled like someone nearby was grilling, and she hugged me again at the passenger side door. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "You know for what." I did know. I also knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. Sloane has spent her whole life inside the ecosystem of our family's preferences, and she has never had great cause to question it, because it has mostly worked in her favor. That's not her fault any more than it's a fault of mine that it mostly didn't. "You don't have to be sorry," I said. "Just know me, okay? You can ask me things. About my work, about what I'm doing. I want you to know what my life looks like." She nodded. Her eyes were doing that bright thing again. "Also," I said, "your future father-in-law is going to be in my life professionally for at least the next 18 months, so you and I are going to have to get better at talking to each other regardless." She laughed at that. A real laugh. The one she's had since she was 6 years old. I got in my car. I drove home in the dark. Radio on low, windows cracked, the interstate almost empty by the time I cleared the Columbus suburbs. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was something quieter than either of those things. My mom called the next morning at 9. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 40 seconds long and mostly consisted of her explaining that she'd had no idea about the project and that she just hoped there were no hard feelings, and that she was proud of me. Of course she was always proud of me. If she just didn't always say it. I listened to it twice, then I made coffee, opened my laptop, and got back to work. I called her back 3 days later. We talked for 20 minutes. It wasn't a breakthrough. My family doesn't really do breakthroughs. We do slow erosions and slow repairs, same as any old building. But I told her about the Columbus project. I told her what adaptive reuse means and why I love it, taking something that was already there, already built by someone else's hands, and making it useful again without erasing what it was. She listened. She asked one question that wasn't quite the right question but was close. It was a start. Preston and Sloane got married in October. I was there. I sat in the 3rd row and I watched my sister walk down the aisle looking like every good thing she has ever been, and Gerald Holloway shook my hand at the reception and said the Columbus project was coming in ahead of schedule, and my mom found me by the bar at some point in the evening and said, simply, "You look beautiful," which from her is quite a lot. My dad danced with me once, near the end of the night. He's not a good dancer. Neither am I. We shuffled around the floor for 90 seconds while the band played something slow, and when it ended he said, "I'm going to try to listen better." I said okay. I meant it. Because that's the thing about buildings and about families both. You don't tear them down just because the structure needs work. You figure out what's worth keeping. You shore up the weak places. You make room for light where there wasn't any before. And sometimes, if the work is done right, what you end up with is something stronger than what you started with. I still eat cereal over the sink on Saturday mornings. Biscuit still walks across my keyboard. The Columbus Project opened in the spring and won a regional preservation award, which I accepted on behalf of my team at a dinner in a hotel ballroom, and I thought about calling my mom from the parking lot afterward. I did call her. She picked up on the second ring. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that Saturday, not the party itself, the moment before it. The moment I was sitting in my apartment with a bowl of cereal, fully prepared to stay home, fully prepared to let it go. And I think about what would have been lost if I had. Not the reveal, not Gerald's face, not my mother's silence. Those things are satisfying to remember, but they're not the point. What would have been lost was the conversation with my dad by the dessert table, the way Sloane held on when she hugged me, the 5 minutes of honesty that 11 years of family dinners never quite managed to produce. Here's what I've come to understand. The people who underestimate you are not your enemies. They're just working with incomplete information. My mom didn't ban me from that party because she hated me. She did it because she had constructed a story about who I was. The difficult one, the buzzkill, the one who makes things complicated, and she needed that story to stay intact for one more afternoon. People do that. They protect their narratives the way they protect anything they've invested in for a long time. It doesn't make it right, but understanding it is different from excusing it, and I think that distinction matters. What I've also come to understand is that silence is not the same as acceptance. I spent years being quiet about my work, my accomplishments, my actual life, because nobody seemed to be asking. And I told myself that was dignified, that I wasn't the kind of person who needed to announce things. But there's a version of silence that is dignified and a version that is just self-erasure dressed up in better clothing. I had been practicing the second kind for a long time without noticing. Marlowe Calloway, the architect, the woman who stabilized a project that was close to falling apart. Gerald said those words in front of 40 people and something in me shifted. Not because I needed the validation, but because I realized I had been withholding myself from the people who were supposed to know me. That's not their fault entirely, that's mine too. The work you put in quietly still counts. Every hour I spent building something real, every project I cared about, every decision I made with integrity when nobody was watching. None of that disappeared because my family didn't know about it. Cause and effect doesn't require an audience. What you build in the dark is still standing in the light. But I think the sharper lesson, the one I'm still sitting with, is about what we owe each other in families. Not money, not proximity, not unconditional approval of choices that hurt people. What we owe each other is the effort to actually see, to ask the real questions, to let someone be more than the role you assigned them when they were 12 years old. That requires a kind of intellectual honesty that is genuinely hard, especially when the old story is comfortable and the new one asks something of you. My dad said he would try to listen better. I believed him, and I still do. Not because people always keep that kind of promise, but because the trying itself is where the change lives. You don't get better at knowing someone in a single conversation. You get better the way you get better at anything, by showing up, over and over and choosing to pay attention. I called my mom from the parking lot of an awards dinner last spring. She picked up on the second ring. That's not a small thing. It took years to get there, but it counts.